Hi, I'm Brian Scanlon, historian and caretaker of Sligo Cemetery. Today we're going to do a tour of Sligo Cemetery around the Civil War. There will be a full programme regarding the Civil War, but just because I am the caretaker, we're going to cover what we can here in Sligo Cemetery. We have 14 people in Sligo Cemetery that was killed in the First World War. Some of them civilians, some Free State soldiers, and some irregulars, IRA. So today we'll go around where the people lay, where they're buried, and we'll give a bit of a story regarding the events that happened. Just for people who may not be too familiar about what was going on in Ireland at the beginning of the 20th century, there was a war of independence after the Dáil sat in 1919 and declared a republic. The war continued against the British forces, and there was a truce called, and in December 1922 Arthur Griffiths and Michael Collins and a team went to London to try to negotiate a ceasefire and an agreement with the British. They went over and they ended up signing an agreement which basically I don't think pleased anyone. I think they were forced into a situation where they were told you either take this or you get nothing. Also, before even they went over, the House of Commons had passed an act in the House of Commons already saying that there would be two entities in the island of Ireland, that the 6 counties with the Protestant majority would remain in the British Isles and part of the United Kingdom, and the House of Commons was willing, if the Irish accepted, to hand over the other 26 counties, but they would have to remain in the Commonwealth and they would have to swear allegiance to the King if they took their positions in a parliament. So what happened on the 6th of December 1921 was the treaty was signed. There was no time to converse with the Republican forces in Ireland, and the men came home and there was a lot of disaffection. There was a lot of men who fought side by side with each other for the previous year, disagreeing with each other. De Valera wasn't in any way, shape or form happy. He wasn't happy that he wasn't consulted before it was signed. Michael Collins later stated that De Valera deliberately sent him over into a situation that there was no winners, and for Michael Collins to take the blame and for him to escape any blame. But in the situation happened then was that on January 1922, at a meeting in the Dáil, the treaty was accepted by a very short majority, and I suppose the seeds were set in for civil war. The huge problem with most Republican men who fought the British was that the Republic that was declared in the Dáil in 1919 had to be abolished. The Irish Free State had to be a member of the Commonwealth, and any member of Parliament had to swear allegiance to King George, and they take that oath or they weren't allowed to sit in the House of Commons. Also, there was 3 ports around the country in the 26 counties that the British retained for military bases. So on the Republican side, they weren't happy at all. That basically they were worse off than when they started, that they had declared a republic. They were fighting a war which they thought they were getting somewhere in. And now there was a treaty signed basically saying there was no republic anymore. You were still a domain of the British Empire, and you would be kind of a puppet government in Dublin, ruling the 26 counties, but they were still answerable to the British. Michael Collins is in the Free State Army side, I suppose, and Arthur Griffith's side was that it was the first step. We're not happy with what we got, but we have something to start with, and we would get the British Army and the British forces out of most of the island. We would have our own police forces. We would have a government who would make decisions just for Ireland. And it was the first step on a long road, but it was a major step. And we should take the 26 counties and be happy with the treaty and go from there. So basically, my own opinion, reading on an awful lot, I don't think there was anyone really happy. But there was the people who wanted nothing to do with the treaty and fight on, and there was the people who thought half a loaf was better than no bread. So that's where we were in the beginning of the year 1922. Okay, I suppose the start of the casualties in Sligo around the Civil War and the War of Independence. The first casualty in Sligo wasn't an enemy fire casualty. It was, I suppose, what the term is, friendly fire. The Republican movement in Sligo had rooms in the Glooney Hall, and the treaty had been signed on the 6th of December, and on a New Year's Eve there was a party in the Glooney Hall for people of Republican minded and young men that were volunteers. And this lad here was Michael McCown from the Riverside. He was only 19, and a gun went off in the Glooney Hall at the party on New Year's Eve, and Michael McCown was shot dead. You know, if you look at the scenario, what was going on, I'd say most of the Republican people hadn't taken sides yet. They hadn't decided whether they're going with Michael Collins' side or whether they're going with De Valera's side, because a couple of weeks after Christmas there was going to be a vote in the Dáil about would they accept the treaty or not. So everything was kind of up in the air. So having people in that room that night with drink taken and all the rest, and there would have been, I'd say, serious debates about what happened in London about signing the treaty. So I'd say it was probably the last time that all Republican forces were together having a drink and celebrating the new year coming in. Obviously it was going to be, they didn't know, but it wasn't going to be a very nice year. But anyway, whatever happened, a shot went off and Michael McCown was shot dead. His funeral was used by the Republican forces as a show of strength. The British were getting out. The treaty was signed as far as any British soldier or British forces or British authority in Sligo at the time on the first day of January 1922, after the night after this lad was shot. Their mindset was, well, we're going to be out of here in a couple of weeks' time, so we're not going to get involved in this. So the Republicans were allowed to put on a big demonstration at this man's funeral, and he was laid in the Glooney Hall with a soldier, a Republican soldier, each side of him, standing guard, and the public were invited in to view this young man, Republican soldier. And then his cortege, his funeral was taken from the Glooney Hall across the road into the cathedral, and there was a large parade and thousands of people. Basically, it was a show of strength to the British forces that you know, we are 95% Republican in this town and in this county, and his whole funeral was used as I suppose a showcase to the British that we are able to stand on our own 2 feet, and we will survive as a nation. On the 3rd of July 1922, James Burns, a young man of 16 years of age, was on sentry duty at Sligo Jail, and he was shot dead during his duties. He was the first person around when things intensified in July, August, September. He was the first casualty in that period. 16-year-old shot dead at the jail. 3 days later, there was an ambush on the RIC number 2 station in Wine Street in Sligo. The Republican forces fired shots from Key Street. James Kivlin, who was a 69-year-old widower, happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was a gentleman from Wolftown Street, and he received bullet wounds and he died later in hospital. This cross in here, Celtic cross, is the grave of Shaad O'Neill. He was the commander of the Free State Army unit that was ambushed at Rockwood on the 13th of July 1922. In the grave is also a brother, you know, some couple of tragedies in the family. He is a brother that drowned 2 years before that. And Shaad O'Neill was only 20 years of age, an officer in the Free State Army. The IRA ambushed him at Rockwood. There was 3 men killed and 3 men injured. Jack Sweeney, aged 19, was also buried here in Sligo, one of the casualties. We have 2 casualties from the 3. I'm not sure where the 3rd one was buried. But also wounded at Rockwood was Sidney Gallagher, who had the pub later in Mailcoach Road, and Joseph Conlon was shot in the hip. He was a veteran of the First World War and one of the Conlon brothers who aided and went off in the First World War. Joseph walked with a limp for the rest of his life with a stick. That was 13th of July. Jack Sweeney, one of the volunteers that is buried here, didn't actually die until the 14th, the day later. Reinforcements, Free State Army troops came into town on the 15th. They took up their headquarters in the courthouse, and on Sunday evening the 16th, shots were fired from the courthouse in Sligo and towards the Fort Hill area of the town at the hotel that was held in Stephen Street by the IRA forces, and there was also IRA forces on the roof of the Ulster Bank. There was shots fired towards Fort Hill and 2 young men was shot dead on the fort. Henry Giblin, who was only 15, and Philip Giblins, who was a painter in Meldrum, who was 22. They were first cousins to each other. And Mrs. Wynne was shot in the stomach and wounded, but she survived. There was really bad feeling in the town after that because, you know, the Free State Army were ambushed a few days beforehand at Rockwood, but that was basically war. But then when the civilians got shot a few days later in the town, it was really bad feelings in the town, and there was a lot of people off the streets. Basically, the town virtually shut down. There was an inquest regarding the 2 men in the courthouse the next day on the 17th. It was opened, witnesses' names was taken, and it was adjourned, and it never opened again until after everything was over. Basically, no one really trusted in what was going on because the people that fired the shots were in control of the courthouse, and the inquest and the coroner was working from the courthouse. So that was a sad ending to 2 young men's lives. The Giblin cousins, they're also buried, interred in this cemetery. The spoils of war don't always go to the victorious. In this patch of grass here, we have 3 Free State soldiers buried that were shot during the Civil War. Skeffington, Byrne and Conlon, in an unmarked grave with nothing on it. And just 50 yards up the path, we have the Republican plot. On the 20th of September 1922, the Free State Army mounted a big search on Bilbulbin Mountain for Republicans on the run. The Free State Army had taken in loads of troops into the area, particularly after Michael Collins was shot dead in August. And the effort was in by the Irish government to end the war as quick as possible. There was also a new law passed, or a new order given by the army, that from after Michael Collins' assassination, that no prisoners would be taken on the Republican side anymore. So on the strength of that, the Republican men in North Sligo who were hiding out in Bilbulbin were searched by the Free State Army, and on the 20th of September, as I said, 4 men were found in one particular part of the mountain and executed. McNeill went back to Dublin to be buried. Brigadier Seamus Devins was buried here. Paddy Carroll, who shot with him, was buried here. And young Banks, who wasn't even 18 at the time, is buried here. The people of the town and area understood that there was 4 men shot, and it was only while the funeral was going on in the cathedral of Devins, Carroll and Banks that word came that there was 2 other bodies also found on Bilbulbin in a different area to where the 4 bodies were found 2 days previous. On the day that the boys were buried, the bodies of Tommy Langan was found and Captain Harry Benson. They were socially buried 2 days later. So out of the 6 men shot on the mountain, we have 5 of them buried here. Also buried here is Paddy Gorman, killed on the 11th of the 12th, 1923. Down here is a bit of a mystery. Commandant Paul Geoghegan, and I think I should spell it, Geoghegan, is a bit of a mystery. He died on the 8th of September 1922 from gunshot wounds, but the cemetery records show us that he wasn't buried in Sligo Cemetery in the Republican plot until November. So there was a 2-month gap from when he was born until he was killed until he was buried. One story is told to me that he was actually buried close to where he died and dug up 2 months later and reinterred in the Republican plot in Sligo Cemetery, but nothing in the books tells us that he was buried somewhere else and that he was reinterred here, just that he was buried here, that's all. Also here is volunteer Batty Noon, who died in 1924, but clearly was a member of the Republican side and was allowed to be buried in the plot even though the war was over. This is the grave of Michael Nevan, youngest mayor of Sligo ever, mayor of Sligo 7 times and Republican mayor of Sligo on the outbreak of the Civil War. Arthur Griffiths wanted to come down to Sligo to make a speech because Sligo was a Republican town and held by the Republican forces. Arthur Griffiths was the newly elected President of Ireland. So the battle lines were drawn for Easter Sunday 1922 when Arthur Griffiths and the Free State Army came into town for that speech at the top of the corner of Grattan Street, O'Connell Street. Michael Nevan features in the clip on YouTube, you know, just to record the man. He's seemingly forgotten now. There's nothing called after him in the town or anything, but I think it's important to. Michael Nevan was very important in the struggle within in Sligo town. Also buried beside Michael Nevan is Sean Cardle, Old IRA, and Commandant Tom Scanlon, Old IRA. Tom Scanlon was in charge of the town forces, the Republican town forces, when Rockwood ambush happened on the 13th of July, and the Free State Army came into town the next day on the 14th of July, and Tom Scanlon with his Republican forces were about to attack the courthouse when Bishop Clancy intervened, and there's a photograph of the Bishop and Tom Scanlon talking at the corner of Stephen Street, Bridge Street, outside the Harp and Shamrock Hotel, which was the headquarters of the Republican forces. And basically Tom Scanlon said he was under order from General Lynch in Dublin to attack the courthouse at 3 o'clock, and the Bishop pleaded with him not to do so, but it fell on deaf ears. So the Bishop actually returned to the palace, gathered up his sleeping blankets and pillows, and he actually moved into the courthouse with the Free State Army to prevent the bloodshed. On the 14th of July 1922, the Republican forces were under orders to attack the courthouse in Sligo at 3 o'clock, which was occupied by the Free State Army. Commandant Tom Scanlon was in command, and at noon the Bishop of Elphin, Bishop Coyne, came down to the corner of Bridge Street and Stephen Street at the Harp and Shamrock Hotel, which was the headquarters of the IRA, to plead with Tom Scanlon not to attack the courthouse. Tom Scanlon informed him that he was under military orders from General Lynch in Dublin, and he was going to follow the orders and attack the courthouse at 3 o'clock. With that, the Bishop returned to the palace, gathered up his blankets and pillows, and he moved into the courthouse with the Free State Army in order to prevent a bloodshed. This is the grave of Michael Conlon from Fort Hill. Himself and his wife is buried here on the front. His wife was Hannah Rooney, so big connections up the hill, the Rooneys and Conlons. On the back is 5 of his brothers' names. Himself, the 5 brothers as mentioned on the back of this, and 2 other brothers, 8 brothers, went off at some stage, fought in the First World War, not all together. Michael was one of the first over there, and when his 2 brothers were killed in 1915, one in April and one in May and one in August. It was tradition of the British Army that the third brother would be sent home. So Michael, being the oldest, was sent home from the First World War before the youngest brother, James, signed up and went out. So there was 8 brothers that took part in the First World War, but the 8 brothers weren't in the war together. And the reason why Michael would have been sent home is that his father was a widower who remarried, and his mother passed away in 1897. So basically he had 3 sisters and 7 brothers, and he was the head of the family by the time the First World War started. 4 of the brothers were killed in action. 1 brother is on the Menin Gate. He has no grave. Thomas is on the Menin Gate. He's no actually physical grave. He was just blown to bits. James is in Mesopotamia, which is Iraq. Alex is in Mesopotamia buried, which is also Iraq. Paddy Conlon is the only grave we can visit. He's buried on the French-Belgian border in what's known as Flanders. They were the 4 brothers that were killed instantly in action. The 5th brother on the bottom, John, came home and he had trench fever, which was basically malaria. And he arrived home in Fort Hill in Sligo in 1919, and he remained in bed until he died in 1922. My grandfather told me he remembers him only leaving the bed 2 occasions on a very hot day, where he was strapped to an armchair and an armchair was strapped to a cart, and he was brought round the town on 2 different occasions just to get him out of the house. But basically he faded away slowly to nothing, and my grandfather reckoned that he was about 6 stone when he died, and he died of trench fever in 1922. Officially outside the time scale of being counted as a recognised casualty of First World War, but we count him because he had no life from the time he came back from the First World War. So basically there's 5 brothers lost to the First World War.
Hello, my name is Adrian O'Neill, founder of Sligo Heritage and History Club, and this concludes our documentary series on Brian Scanlon virtual tour. We just didn't want to conclude it with just Brian. What I really want to do is kind of have an end note on thanking him for everything that he's done, especially over the last few years. I've been doing tours for 9 years and the page is 7 years old. And since I started the Sligo Heritage and History Club, Brian's always been there to help me. And over the last few years, there's been certain projects, like for instance, when I came up here one day, once for the first time with him, he showed me around, pointed out a few features here and there. One of those features was B.T. Gallagher's grave. And when he showed me the state of it, it was nearly crumbling. It was nearly about to snap in half. You should see the back of it. And then I got in touch with CK Monumental, and from there we set up a GoFundMe page, and you guys, the members of the Sligo Heritage and History Club page, helped give her a new gravestone, and it was amazing now, and that'll last for a lot longer than the original one. We were walking up here one day and he just points at a gravestone, and a very basic gravestone. There was barely anything on it. And he goes, "Guess who's buried there?" And I was like, "I have no idea." And he goes, "That's P.A. McHugh's grave with his wife." And it was actually his son's grave, very basic, and I couldn't believe it. Like, he's got a statue outside the town hall. So a couple of years passed, and Mary Lahan got in touch with me, and she wanted to set up a GoFundMe page, and she got in touch with all of his family, had gotten in touch with each other, and they had not even known that they were related. Whatever this gravestone she put together, she uncovered then that there was quite a lot more people buried in the grave, and their names are now on that gravestone. All of this is down to Brian Scanlon. Obviously he's an absolutely amazing man, and I thank him for this. And guys, I hope you enjoy the second part.